Well, the white smoke is rising. The 49ers have selected a new defensive coordinator. It is Steve Wilks, former head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, but I think more significantly for this role, former DC at a couple places in the NFL and a coach with a DB background. So the 49ers defensive evolution continues. We're going to go through Steve Wilks, the background that he brings, what it might mean for the 49ers defense moving forward, and some of the potential staff impacts for the 49ers. So here's our piece up on The Athletic. I'm grabbing it right now, taking the link, putting it into the comment section. Maybe Mike can put it into the description right now. Go ahead and check it out in the comment section. We have some instant analysis of what this Steve Wilks hire means. There on the screen, that's Steve Wilks photoed with Carolina last year. He started as the DB coach, and then after Matt Rule was fired, was the interim head coach of the Panthers. And obviously, the Panthers made a nice little run. They were a terrible team early on, and they threatened to make the playoffs a little bit later with Steve Wilks as their interim coach. I thought that it was interesting. Jordan Elliott, who does some good coverage, he was at the Pro Bowl. I have him on Twitter right here. He actually talked to Steve Wilks at the Pro Bowl. He talked to Brian Burns, the Panthers edge rushers at the Pro Bowl, about Steve Wilks. Have a listen into this. So in case you didn't hear, so I know on some people's screens it varies. It sometimes those Twitter audio doesn't come through, but he said that he considers Steve Wilks a father figure. That he was a player's coach slash father figure. That he really connected with players on a personal level. That's Brian Burns. It's a really good edge rusher for the Carolina Panthers, and I think that's significant because we look at some of the background here. Steve Wilks brings a DB background to the job. I'm going to go through some of his coaching resume. He's 53 years old. He started as a defensive coordinator at smaller colleges, Johnson C. Smith in 95, then Savannah State. He was the head coach of Savannah State in 99 before he went up to the major D1 level, Illinois State, Appalachian State, because Appalachian State's still a smaller school there, East Tennessee State, Bowling Green. Finally, Notre Dame, 2004. That's where Steve Wilks really cracked into that power football FBS role with a DB coach job at Notre Dame. Washington, the Chicago Bears. So the Chicago Bears was 2006 to 2008. That was the first NFL job for Steve Wilks. The Chargers from 09 to 11. And then he went to Carolina in 2012, from 2012 to 2014. Mike just sent me the video, so we can maybe take a look at that video in a little bit of Brian Burns talking about Steve Wilks with audio actually working. So we're at 12 to 14. Wilks is the Carolina Panthers DB coach. And then he is promoted. They want to really keep him in 15 and 16 instead of seeing him hired away as a defensive coordinator elsewhere. This is still under Ron Rivera, obviously, the year the Panthers went to the Super Bowl. So they gave Wilks an assistant head coach title in 15 and 16. Finally, in 17, he was promoted to defensive coordinator. And it just so happens that Kyle Shanahan's first game as an NFL head coach for the 49ers in 2017 came against Steve Wilks' first game as an NFL defensive coordinator. That was the season opener, week 1, 2017 season. Also, Christian McCaffrey's NFL debut, Panthers at 49ers. And I believe the 49ers only managed 9 points in that game. They didn't score a touchdown against Steve Wilks' defense. So take that and add in the fact that Kyle Shanahan faced Wilks multiple times in his defenses when Shanahan was the coordinator of the Falcons because Carolina was a division opponent. And you can see some of the foundational structure of this hire for the 49ers. The foundational structure being that Kyle Shanahan does have familiarity with how tough it is to go against Steve Wilks' scheme. So you ask me about Steve Wilks' scheme. Well, I said that he is a secondary expert, former DB, mainly a DB coach throughout his positional coaching years. And he's a specialist in pattern matching coverages as they relate to the cover 3. The 49ers, when Robert Saleh first came in 2017, he was Kyle Shanahan's first hire as defensive coordinator. They ran the Seattle-style cover 3. That was the predominant coverage. It was zone. over time, the cover three, I think, has become less in vogue in the NFL. So the 49ers have gradually run less of it, but they still run more cover three than most other teams in the NFL. And what we mean by pattern matching zone coverages, it's not a standard zone where every defender is just attached to a zone no matter what. You vary what you do based on the formation of the offense. You match the pattern of the opposing offense. And I think that's really necessary in the modern NFL, especially with these complicated formations that are being tossed at you, motions, all this and all that. You have to be adaptable as a defense, and I think that Kyle Shanahan recognized that adaptability from Steve Wilks and what he's done before, coverage-wise especially. The big picture take here is that the 49ers, I wrote this, that they want to maintain continuity, and I'm going to read a Kyle Shanahan quote from the article up on the screen to you here in a second, but they also want to continue the evolution of their defense. This past season, the 49ers had a much weaker pass rush than they did in 2019, for example, when they last had a really, really great defense, right? Their pass rush was even weaker than the stretch run of 2021. This was a much more coverage-based defense. So a defense that had in the past been rush over coverage, decidedly so, has evolved to a coverage over rush unit, or at least an even unit that each side is symbiotically fueling the other. So in the case of this hire right here, Kyle Shanahan mentioned that he wanted to maintain continuity when he talked last week, but I think it's also important to note that he is bolstering the back end with a very respected DB coach mind, who's now going to be the defensive coordinator. Meanwhile, Chris Kasarik and the wide nine front, the elongated front, bringing those edge rushers around with the speed rush, that's here to stay. In fact, it was reported last night that the 49ers are going to keep Chris Kasarik. He's not going to go to Houston. There had been some rumors that was possible as a defensive coordinator. There had also, with those news rumors, I want to say news and rumors because it was actually officially reported, there was talk that Chris Kasarik, to stay with the 49ers would need to offer him something to sweeten the pot, maybe more money. Even a DC role was tossed around by Aaron Wilson in the Houston media, who reported this. Well, obviously, Kasarik is not getting the defensive coordinator role of the 49ers. But what's happened here is that with Steve Wilks being the defensive coordinator, but a DB-minded DC, Chris Kasarik is going to have, I think, free reign over the defensive line. And that's not a bad thing because Chris Kasarik might be the best defensive line coach in football. And now, so you have three venerated coaches at each level of the 49ers defense. You have Kasarik at D-line, you have Johnny Holland at linebacker, and you have Steve Wilks at DB, but he's also the larger defensive coordinator. Now, there's some interesting news that came out this morning, or at least I saw it this morning. It was late last night, and it's that the 49ers will not renew the contract of cornerbacks coach Corey Undlin. So Undlin is free to pursue jobs elsewhere. Maybe he follows DeMeco Ryans to Houston. And that makes a whole lot of sense now with the hiring of Steve Wilks, because Corey Undlin and Daniel Bullocks had split secondary coaching duties. Bullocks took the safeties, Undlin took the cornerbacks. If you're going to hire a DC who is a DB specialist, you don't need two separate defensive backs coaches. So they're letting Undlin walk. I expect the 49ers to promote Daniel Bullocks to DB coach from safeties coach. And of course, they're going to have Steve Wilks working with that back end. So big picture, 49ers maintain continuity, but continue to foster defensive evolution. On the lines of maintaining continuity, why don't we take a look at this quote that I put into the article right here. Oops, I'm highlighting it for you. I'm going to actually screenshot this and drag it up here so we make it bigger on the screen so everybody can see it. Here we go. And let us read. I love our defensive staff. I love our defense, Kyle Shanahan said last week, while the 49ers were still in the process of filling the vacancy. I'm trying to get something where we don't have to turn much over. Hopefully it's someone who can work with who we have and what we've accomplished here, because I love the scheme that we run, and I feel the foundation that we have on the D-line, at linebacker, at corner, at safety, I think our players fit very well in it too. So I'm hoping to find someone who fits with us personality-wise and scheme-wise. This is where I am going to bring in the video. This time it will work, but I have to download it first, of Brian Burns talking about Steve Wilks. All right, we've downloaded it. Now I'm going to pop it open on the screen because that last line, when you say, fit personality wise, I think that's really important for a team that's rolling like the 49ers. I think that the culture in the building has been, decidedly healthy, and that's between both players and coaching staff. So the 49ers want somebody to fill that role. Okay, here we go. So here's Brian Burns. This is from Jordan Elliott at the Pro Bowl on Steve Wilks' personality and how he fits with his players. Carolina edge rusher Brian Burns.
Wilks is a great man, in my opinion. And one of the main things about him is that I think he cares more about his players as humans more than just his players. So that's the main thing about Wilks. Like, he taught me a lot, and he kind of just fit into that like father role for me. He's just a genuine person to me.
He's just a genuine person. He fit into that father role for me. Brian Burns, edge rusher for the Panthers, says. And I go back to this quote right here from Shanahan, reading it off the screen. I think our players fit very well in the scheme too. He's going to want the players to fit into that scheme. So I'm hoping to find someone who fits with us personality-wise and scheme-wise. It's big. Personality-wise and scheme-wise. So I think that Kyle Shanahan obviously felt that Steve Wilks fit that bill for the 49ers. So, new DC for the 49ers. He replaces DeMeco Ryans. Big shoes to fill. The 49ers are in a situation here where there's going to be some turnover personnel-wise on their defense. And obviously, coaching-wise, they're trying to replace DeMeco Ryans with Wilks. But you look at the defensive line, a lot of names are going to be free agents. In fact, this is a good time for me to pop open the depth chart. Why don't we take a look at what the 49ers defense is looking like right now with 46 players under contract. This is going to be what Steve Wilks inherits as the 49ers defensive coordinator. Defense is highlighted down here. Scroll down a little bit further. And you can see defensive line, there's no Amenahu under contract for next year. No Ebukam, no Jordan Willis. So the 49ers are going to definitely be on the edge rusher market. They want to find somebody to bookend Nick Bosa. I've mentioned that defensive line has not been as strong as it had been in the past as far as a pass rush goes. I wrote about that actually a lot already last week. They're really going to need a second-year jump from Drake Jackson. Just take a look at something like this. This is the 49ers pass rush over the years, both pressure rate and sack rate up on the screen. And blue is good and red is bad. In 2019, they were obviously dark blue and sack rate, 9%. Without Bosa in 2020, it wasn't pretty. It got good again in 2021, especially down the stretch. But in 2022, they ranked number 16 in sack rate and number 13 in pressure rate. So the 49ers defensive line is not the monster that it once was. And that's context as we discuss what Steve Wilks is jumping into. The 49ers defense was number one in the league. It was the best finish that it's had under Shanahan, but the defensive line was not as overpowering as it once was. So that's why I say this is more of a coverage over rush unit now. And of course, the linebackers are total studs. You see them here. No Azeez Al-Shire, though, right now for 2023. So what will the 49ers do to bolster that room with the third linebacker? Did they give it to Oren Burks? Did they draft or sign somebody else? We'll see. But the defensive backfield right now, it's the most loaded position numbers-wise on this team. That's where Steve Wilks has his greatest coaching specialty of the DBs. And, I think they ended the season on a fantastic note. Charvarius Ward and Diamond Lenore, these two guys right here, they gave up a grand total of 2 catches and 16 yards against the Philadelphia Eagles. What will the 49ers do once they fill out this room? If they do re-sign Emmanuel Mosley and he is healthy next year, do they move Diamond Lenore to nickel? That's a possibility. Do they try to have Samuel Womack start there? Where's Quantrez Knight in his development? They assigned him to a future contract. And of course, at safety, DeMeco Ryans was able to maximize the strengths and minimize the weaknesses of Talanoa Hufanga, a new all-pro. But what about that safety position opposite him? That's all stuff that the 49ers have to take care of with Jimmy Ward being a pending free agent. So this is the defense. They've got good players, but I think they're like 4 or 5 additions that the 49ers are going to have to make either through free agency and or the draft this offseason. And that's the personnel group that Steve Wilks is going to have to work with for this football team. All right, let's answer some questions here from the studio. Why don't we get the Wilks article up on the screen again and open this up to some good questions. Here we go. 49ers hire Steve Wilks as defensive coordinator. What style will he bring? That was fun for me to write, talking about the Steve Wilks style here over the last few minutes. That's why it takes me a while to get online. I have to write these articles right before I go online. Then you guys could read them. Check them out on The Athletic. We get into it really deep. And this is a big hire for the 49ers because this is the number one defense in the NFL, hiring a new leader. All right, question time. Water time, then question time. I know we post your questions. That's what Mike says. Ooh, water tastes really good when you're thirsty. Nothing better than a glass of cold water when you're thirsty. All right, let's get some questions in here about this hire. Since he's a DB coach, would the 49ers keep Jason Verrett? I don't think this would have anything to do with that. I think that if the 49ers see that Jason Verrett is working back and want to sign him to another flyer deal, that's no downside. They can do that. I mean, Verrett's a Pro Bowl cornerback when he's healthy. The thing is, I haven't heard anything from Jason Verrett and his recovery. That obviously was a devastating injury that he suffered at practice. Do you think they re-sign to Sean Gibson? If Gibson decides that he wants to keep on playing, I think they might re-sign him, but Gibson is pondering retirement. We want to pop this open right here. Gibson would be in that safety spot opposite Talanoa Hufanga. Back to the article. The 49ers do not get a draft pick for hiring Steve Wilks. But if he stays with the 49ers for at least 2 seasons and then it's hired away to be a head coach, and Wilks has already been a head coach, 2018 for the Arizona Cardinals, then they would get a couple comp picks again, just like they were in line to get comp picks for DeMeco Ryans and a lot of other hires recently. I don't know if he's going to carry an assistant head coach title. That's going to be up to the 49ers, and obviously Wilks negotiating that when the time comes of his official announcement. I'm not sure if Wilks is going to bring any names with him because the 49ers staff on the defensive side of the ball may be relatively filled out. Let's wait to see who all DeMeco Ryans takes from the 49ers. Like, he might take Darryl Tapp, who's the assistant defensive line coach, to be the head defensive line coach in Houston. In that case, I think it would be more up to Kasarik to hire his assistant. You look at linebackers. Does Johnny Holland want an assistant? Because in the past it was Ryans and Holland, both linebacker specialists. Ryans was like Wilks, right? Defensive coordinator, but rooted in the linebacker position. So he would help a lot with the linebackers. So we'll see if Johnny Holland's going to want some help there. But I think in, the DB role, they don't need Corey Undlin anymore. Undlin might actually go to the Texans. So you're going to have Bullocks and obviously DB specialist Steve Wilks in that DB spot. Yeah, so Undlin's contract expired, and the 49ers let it expire without re-signing him because they knew they were going to hire Steve Wilks. Daniel Bullocks, their safeties coach, had already been working extensively with cornerbacks in some of the drills last year. So you don't need a safeties coach and a corner coach and a DB-minded defensive coordinator. He's going to keep the 4-3. Steve Wilks is going to keep the 4-3. That's, more of that is on Chris Kasarik. They're letting Chris Kasarik have free reign up front. Kasarik wants to run the wide 9 out of the 4-3. Kasarik's going to run the wide 9 out of the 4-3. Obviously, Wilks is on board with that. Kyle Shanahan wants the continuity. But, Wilks, again, this is pattern matching coverages. He runs the type of zone coverages in the mix of zone and man that the 49ers think that they have evolved into on the defensive side of the ball. And by pattern matching coverages, I mean non-standard zone. You're not just lining up and playing a specific part of the field. You are adapting based on personnel packages, receiver groupings on the offensive side of the football. So the 49ers wanted a sophisticated defensive coordinator who could evolve their defense and their scheme along with the times. The NFL is getting really complex offensively. To keep up, you've got to have a guy who's on top of his P's and Q's, and they believe that Steve Wilks is that guy. Wilks doesn't have much experience with existing staff. There may have been some crossover with some assistants at other spots, but people are wondering, hey, is he part of the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree? That's more of an offense thing, the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. You talk about terminology, you talk about concepts that developed a long time ago. Shanahan and the whole Washington thing, the Houston thing, that was the offensive side of the ball. Shanahan outsources defense. He always has. Shanahan understands defense, but he outsources defense. He's an offensive head coach who hires a defensive coordinator who has full control over that side of the football. So it doesn't matter if the guy's part of the Shanahan coaching tree. What we do need in this situation for the 49ers to make the hire is Shanahan to be impressed with the candidate. And Shanahan, as the offensive coordinator of the Falcons a few years back, today's the 6-year anniversary of Shanahan being hired by the 49ers, by the way. So 6+ years ago, as the OC of the Falcons, he went against Steve Wilks' defenses in the division, NFC South, against the Carolina Panthers. And Shanahan's very first game as 49ers head coach, the defense that he was going up against was the very first game for Steve Wilks as an NFL defensive coordinator. 2017 Panthers at 49ers. Now, in 2018, Wilks was the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, so Shanahan went up against Wilks' defenses twice. I'm sure Shanahan was impressed over that period of time schematically by what Steve Wilks brings to the table. Wonder if any Carolina free agents follow Wilks to San Francisco. Where's Brian Burns at contractually? Let me see this. They were talking about trading Brian Burns this year, weren't they? Let's see. Brian Burns over the cap. Because the 49ers need an edge rusher, that's for sure. Opposite. Burns still under contract for a while because one more year. His 5th-year option season is next year, making $16 million. So I would expect Carolina to try to pay him or trade him this offseason. Same year as Bosa, yes. I remember that. Burns came out in 2019. Bosa's about to enter a 5th-year option deal, but they're going to extend him in all likelihood before that. It's a good question. I can't wait to hear what McCaffrey has to say about Wilks. One thing about Wilks is that team and that defense took off when Wilks took over for Matt Rule, but McCaffrey was no longer there. McCaffrey was on the 49ers at that point this past season. All right, let's go back to the top here. The question's not rolling in as profusely as before. 49ers have hired Steve Wilks as their defensive coordinator. He brings a DB background to the job. He's been a DB coach and a DC and a head coach of the Arizona Cardinals in 2018. But I think that the key here is this guy, as a former defensive back and as a DB coach, is really going to help bolster that side of the ball. The big picture take here is that the 49ers maintain continuity on the defensive side of the football by embracing the fact that they've shifted to more of a coverage over rush unit. And this job just underscores that. Because Kasarik in the wide 9 front, that's here to stay. Kasarik's going to run the front. Wilks, I think, is going to run that back end. And you have venerated names at each level of the defense between Kasarik at defensive line, Johnny Holland at linebacker, and Wilks together with Daniel Bullocks, because Corey Undlin is not being retained by the 49ers as cornerbacks coach. Those guys are going to be running the DB spots. I think that, between Kasarik, Holland, and Wilks, you got 3 venerated names running what was the number 1 defense in the NFL last year. But Wilks must manage the 49ers defensive personnel turnover, which it's significant. They've got to bolster that defensive line. Brian Burns, trade for him if you can. Trade and pay Brian Burns. That would definitely add the bookend to Nick Bosa that the 49ers have been looking for. It's a situation here where the 49ers are a bit of a crossroads defensively. They're going to have to do a good job this offseason as far as roster construction to make sure that things stay dominant on that defensive end. And the coaching aspect of it, that's going to be handled by defensive coordinator Steve Wilks. All right, everybody, thank you for joining. Hope I answered some of your questions. I'll be back soon. This has been the show introducing the 49ers' new defensive coordinator. Everybody take care.